Oh, this is the evaluation. Oh, okay. I'd already run the copies when I got the thing to you. But this I didn't have, so I just ran it separately and got it to everybody. Because it has, I mean, it's a good summary thing. But I did give them the whole, you know, rather than just printing it off the sign. I just did the whole thing. I left it in the car intentionally. I'm not going to be embarrassed again. At least not having a phone. It was. But it is safely in the car today. Yes. But it is safely in the car tonight. Now, BJ will probably send me an email or a text or something.
I always think mine is office phone. I won't be able to.
Oh, it's 6:30.
You're
Are we ready?
Might forgot.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening. On behalf of the Board of Education, I welcome you to the meeting to deal with the tentative budget and some other items. Thank you for your attendance and your interest in educational matters. We appreciate your setting your cell phones on silent or off. We will rise for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Now the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. We'll give you a few moments to get collected, Mr. Swan.
Go ahead, I can catch up.
Okay. Does anyone have questions about the agenda? A motion is in order to adopt the agenda.
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Dr. Kudak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Poole. Other discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. The next item is student and staff recognition. Do you have anything? Okay. Does anyone sign in to to make public comments on agenda items? None. Thank you. And the superintendent's report. Do you have anything, Ms. Ferris? Student support services. We will consider approval of the school year 2012-2013 tentative budget. So, Ms. Clark.
Good evening. I was just going to introduce a few things that have changed since the draft budget. Of course, Dr. Wagner will go through his narrative. But as far as, if you will recall, in January we had the discussion of the draft budget, and close to that meeting day we received a notification that the SEEK base per pupil was changing, and if you will recall, that had left us looking for around $400,000 at the time. And so you will find I've given you a copy of an updated narrative of the draft budget, so you have that for your records, so that you can compare to Dr. Wagner's narrative tonight for his tentative budget. And we continue to use the SEEK revenues with the base of $3,833, and you will see a small increase compared to what we were expecting due to some changes in the exceptional child count from KDE. Also, other than that, the revenues remain the same because we will not evaluate tax revenue until August, so those remain the same as the draft budget. I did update the beginning balance to $5.6 million, which is a little bit higher than the draft, just based on anticipated revenues, expenses, where we seem to be at this point throughout the year, and some of our revenues coming in a little bit better than even we had anticipated. As always, with the tentative budget, I update salaries and benefits based on our actual anticipated personnel. So I go person by person and put in their step increases. And so we did see a reduction in salaries and benefits for two reasons. If you recall, when we presented the staffing allocations in April, we were seeing a net loss of 4 teaching positions. So that was part of the reduction. And then in addition, when I do the draft budget, I do a mass step increase. So everybody gets one. And then once I go back through and actually look at each individual, not everybody gets a step increase. So we saw a reduction, and that was approximately the other half that you'll see. Other than that, we updated a few small expenses. We reviewed our district improvement plan to make sure that any budgeted items were in line with that, if any of those had general fund as a source of funding. Updated the KISTA lease payments, saw a small savings of about $1,100 once we received the actual schedule for the new lease for the last 3 buses that we purchased. Included some funds to upgrade some VMAT software for site licenses for the schools. And then of course updated the schools Section 6 allocations, their instructional money, based on the allocations that were presented to you in April. With that said, the contingency is about $5.6 million in the budget you'll see tonight. Dr. Wagner will go into a little more detail about how KDE is changing how they calculate contingency. If you've read his narrative, you've probably already read that, but he will touch on that. And we have a balanced budget with revenues exceeding expenditures by $30,390. The addition, of course, with the tentative budget, we are required to include the special revenue fund, Fund 2, and those are based on our recurring state and federal grants. So anything that is non-competitive that we receive each year, we will continue to update those amounts as we receive our award notifications from KDE, and if we receive any additional grants beyond our normal yearly grants. Capital outlay fund, the revenue projection is the same as the draft budget. I did update the beginning balance. We had planned ahead for some additional bond payments that we didn't end up having to do, so we have a little higher anticipated beginning balance. I spoke with Joe Nance, and as we have some bond issues anticipated after July 1, we included $250,000 as an estimate, just in case we have any bond payments to make on any new issues that are issued after July 1st. And continuing to allocate the $100,000 for property insurance and capital outlay that we have for several years at this point. The building fund, for the most part, there were no changes. We did update the FSPK state match. KDE did put out a SEEK projection on their website late January, early February, I think, and it included a slight change in what we had in the draft budget. It was about a $20,000 to $30,000 decrease. So we updated for that and updated the bond and principal payments. Accordingly, updated the food service fund, worked with food service director on that to update beginning balance, revenue, and projections based on what she anticipates. So those are the things that have changed. For the most part, not a lot, other than the good news that we were able to offset a lot of that anticipated SEEK decrease with some of the reduction in salaries and benefits due to staffing allocation changes in updating salaries for individual personnel. That'll turn it over to Dr. Wagner.
Thank you.
Well, it is a pleasure to be with you again this evening, and we're going to take the second step in a 4-step process to develop a working budget for school year 2012-13. As we've done in the past, please don't hesitate if you have a question to interrupt, and let's deal with it. But what we're looking at this evening, and it does require board approval, is your tentative budget for the next school year. I appreciate additional state revenue for the higher number. Conversely, if by chance the number was lower, then it translates into less state revenue to the district. As we talk about what's a part of the numbers that go into determining what the local revenue looks like, there are several very important numbers. The first one is is the assessment or the value of the property in the school district that would be subject to school taxes. And as we discussed in the draft budget stage, we're looking at this point, still think the estimated assessed value for 2012-13 will be slightly over $2.7 billion. Now the certified amount for the current school year came in about 2.699. So the bottom line is at this juncture, we're only projecting a very slight increase in the total assessment. Quite frankly, it works out to about 0.71%. So we're expecting, for the most part, the assessed value of the property in the school district that will be subject to school taxes to be flat. The next component, in terms of what we use to develop local revenue projections, is we used the current 2011-2012 tax rate. And that's set at 51.2 cents for real estate, 51.2 cents for tangible or personal property, 53.5 cents for motor vehicles, and assumption that you would continue with the 3% utility tax that's been in place. So those are the pieces that go into the formula to determine, along with the state projected SEEK dollars, what we think the general fund revenue is going to look like. As Stacy pointed out, at this point the budget does have a beginning balance of 5.6 million. That's up about $230,000 from our discussion in January at the draft budget stage. And it could trend higher or it could trend lower. It just comes down to when the books close on June 30, did we meet the revenue estimates or exceed them? And on the expense side, did we at least stay at what we estimated them to be, or would they be slightly under? If revenue is slightly over, expense slightly under, then you're going to realize a higher ending balance for the 11-12 school year, which translates into your beginning balance for 12-13. If I could direct your attention to Table A at the bottom of page 2, you can see the 5 different funds that we track. Now, the general fund, of course, is the fund in which you provide almost all of your operational costs. It is the fund that you have the most flexibility. Special revenue fund, that's where all your grants go. And those are pretty much dictated for you. And what you've worked very hard to do over the past several years is, if the grant's worth X, you've worked hard to make sure that whatever the value of X was, that's what the expenditures matched. Capital outlay and building funds are your restricted funds. And for the most part, what those are used is to pay your debt service requirement. We start with the building fund. We use everything that's in the building fund for debt service. If that doesn't cover all the requirement, then we take from the capital outlay fund. But you're both restricted capital funds. And then you have your food service fund. And those are the 5 funds that we track. If I could direct you to Table B on page 3. Table B gives you a look at the draft budget and the tentative or projected budget. Now let me insert, just for so you'll know, the numbers I'm using in the draft budget column are the numbers from the revised draft budget, okay? And as you can see, we're expecting, from the January discussion to the current discussion, general fund revenue changed upward by $254,000. A major piece of that is as Stacy shared with you, we've raised what we expect the beginning balance to be by a little over $229,000. So that's the bulk of it. And then there were some nice, pleasant surprise in terms that the Department of Education certified some slightly higher numbers for the special needs component of the SEEK formula, which translates into additional dollars. Special revenue, we don't have any projection there, even though we did include in the tentative budget an amount of slightly over $4.5 million, because that changes daily. Until we get to the September working budget, it's going to fluctuate. So for comparison purposes, I just use 0 in both columns. Capital outlay up slightly, and that's attributable to the fact that you're going to have a little higher beginning balance than we anticipated in January. And you can see the building fund is the same. Food service fund looks like it's going to be up some, but that's basically a restricted fund from the standpoint it's generated by your school food service program, and you're pretty limited to expending it on the food service program. On the revenue side, any questions? You can see what we're, I'm
I
sorry.
have one,
Yes,
and this may should have been a Stacy question. When we're determining how much to put in as a guesstimate for next year, okay, the omitted property tax is the one, and there's always a rule about that, and I always forget what it is.
I believe that's the one in the past, they recommend that you budget 0, but I think we had budgeted a little up.
We're budgeting, looks like 72,000 for next year, 50,000 for next year, okay. But this year, currently, we have already realized 894,000
It was
from
one
it.
check. Most of that was one check that we received.
Okay.
From a tax bill that came in. So
So-
that is certainly not expected every year.
Okay, okay, because I was thinking 72.
We received over $800,000 in one check from one tax bill. It was
Okay.
over a $2 million tax bill.
Okay, so we won't get that again. So we're,
Unfortunately.
okay. So I was thinking 72, 894, okay, got it.
Correct.
Okay.
Just as a little bit of a refresher, omitted taxes, delinquent taxes, we're pretty much instructed not to budget
Because you
too
can't
much
count on
because
them.
you really don't know.
Right.
And I would remind you again, as you're looking at numbers on the PSC taxes, it's kind of, as I've explained previously, that's kind of feast and famine approach. Some years you've got money that you never thought was coming your way, and then other years when you're looking, you don't get close to what you're expecting. So
And the PSC is expected to decrease.
we expect it to decline a little bit next year, yes, ma'am. Because we expect that particular class or category of property assessed value to decline. So it would result in a little lower
Right.
than expected projection. So is everyone pretty comfortable with the revenue side? Very good.
Thank you.
Then let's move on to expenses. The first obligation you have is to make sure you cover all your debt service. So if I could direct you to Table C on page 4, basically what you have on budgeted, or what we expect your debt service to be in 2012-13 is slightly over $3.639 million. Your projected recurring revenue from your capital outlay fund and building fund is projected to be $3.644 million. So the bottom line is you got enough to cover it. Now, it leaves a balance of $5,000, but that's okay. All right, you've got some things going on, and the whole idea here is that you've got enough to cover it. So, and that's what you can use those sources of funding on, so you've maximized what you have and move, and so you're in good shape in terms of meeting the #1 priority, because the state of Kentucky will see that you meet your debt service payment. This budget, in terms of expenditures, contains no salary schedule improvements. I direct you to Table D on page 5. You can see the change in terms of the budget for the current school year compared to the projected or tentative budget for 2012-13, and you can see that there's just a slight change, and I think Stacy covered that very well in terms of what's transpired since January to the tentative budget stage. And I don't want to belabor the point, because here's what we're into, and I know you've heard me talk about 85% as being in personnel. And I still am very concerned about that. But you've got two things that you've got to contend with in this budget and probably in the next budget cycle. Is we definitely anticipate your revenue streams to be flat. And if you, and as you took steps in your April meeting, you're matching your staff with what your projected student needs are. Because you want to, and you have the ability to continue your academic program, but that number is probably going to climb a little bit on us over the next couple of years, simply because your revenue side is going to be flat. But just even if you have no changes in your staff, the cost is going to go up slightly as long as you continue to award step increases. So I'm not, with those factors, I don't want you to be overly concerned about it. Because if we were showing, at the same time, I'll make this statement. If we were showing some substantial increases on the revenue side and that number was continuing to climb, then I would say we need to be very concerned. But under the conditions that you're operating under for the next 2 years, we know, for example, that the SEEK base for 12-13 is less than the SEEK base for 11-12. And the SEEK base for 13-14 is going to be less than 12-13. So, you know, the funding stream is going to be flat or move downward slightly. And the only potential new revenue sources in the general fund are going to come from, quite frankly, if there's something that occurs that generates additional funding locally, or we get lucky again and get a very large check from some back taxes that everybody, quite frankly, almost forgot about. It would be my guess on that. So I want you to be aware of it, but I don't want you to be overly concerned about it, because you staff your schools based on what your needs are. Your only other choice is to go into, for example, into your staffing policy and guidelines and change those guidelines that would require you to have fewer teachers. I don't, at this stage, that's not what you want to do, nor is it something that you even need to consider doing, because as I've mentioned to you on several occasions, and will again tonight, you're in good shape, from my vantage point, to weather the storm over the next 2 to 4 years. Let's play that out. 4 years down the road, if we're standing here and we're having the same kind of discussions about the SEEK base declining, then you'll have plenty of company, like the other 173 boards of education around the state of Kentucky trying to decide what they're going to do. So, if we could go to page 6 and look at table E, this shows you the differences that have occurred in each of these budget areas since we had the draft budget discussion. And the bottom line is, quite frankly, that from January to May, at this juncture, there's actually been a decrease in projected expenses for next year of slightly over $455,000. So that means at the tentative budget stage, your contingency is setting at about $5.6 million, which is a good place to be, because that means you don't have to, every time you get notification about a decrease in your state funding, you don't have to get real uptight about it, because you'll have some ability to deal with it. So overall, we're looking at this point, projected expenditures for fiscal year 2012-13, it's slightly over $36 million from the general fund. The budget reserve, and that's the contingency. You know, you're required at this stage to have a 2% contingency. On a $36 million budget, a 2% contingency is $808,000+. That would make me very uncomfortable, quite frankly, if that's where you were. As you've heard, as I've stated before, and I apologize for repeating myself, but I'll do that about 3 times a year. My goal is for you to be around 8%. I'm not unhappy, particularly with what you're faced doing over the next several years. If you can maintain it somewhere in the 5% area, you will be fine. Okay? So the current contingency represents about 13.9%. Now that's a little higher than perhaps in the past, because the Department of Education just recently changed the formula. It used to be you had to account for your general fund, your special revenue two fund, your capital outlay, building fund, and school food service, and then apply your contingency to that to compute a percentage. And they decided that the only two funds you use for that formula now are the general fund and the school food service fund. So bottom line is the amount of dollars stays the same, but the percentage goes up. They seem to have some very sound logic for what they're doing there, but the bottom line is you're, again, positioned well to move into the next 2-year cycle because I'm more interested in the dollar amount that you have at your disposal to do what you need to do for the children of the school district. You know, you're not going to be sitting here anytime in the near future struggling about how we pay the bills. You're going to be fine.
Or how we get off the watch list.
Or how you get off the, thank you. Ms. Hicks, you've been on the watch list, you know that. But you know, in the decisions that this board has made over the last several years has put you in a position to weather the next 2 to 4 years and not have to do major fire sale surgery, so to speak, to your academic programs and to your curriculum. And I think you should be pleased, hopefully you're pleased with that. On page 7, the last item I'd like to bring your attention is you can see 4 years worth of tentative budgets, and you can see that you've done a great job of keeping them on page 7, table F. You come in with an expense as percent of revenue, for
Mine
example.
doesn't have page 7,
Oh, my.
but my computer does.
Well, I got
I'll
one
give you
page 7.
seven.
I can share with everyone so you can see what I'm talking about.
It's like the one on the screen.
Okay, great. But basically, it's at 99.9%. And as we've discussed in the past, anything under 100% means that you have a structurally balanced budget. Now, I didn't say it's by a lot, but it's structurally balanced. And you can see where you've been in the past 4 years. So you've worked very hard at each step of the way to be structurally balanced. Now, I think this is an excellent place to be because we still have several unknowns. There's a lot of time between May and September. You know, the third step is we'll get the certified tax or the assessment, and then you as a board have to make decisions about tax rates. But just as importantly, any step of the way, I would like to tell you but I can't with 100% surety. I'd like to say that come January, you won't get a nasty letter, so to speak, or a surprise letter from the department saying, "Oops,
Yeah, we
you made a
miscalculated.
mistake." You've had those over the last several years, but you are in a position that if that were to happen, that you will be able to deal with it. And I think a very good manner. So with that, I'll entertain any questions you have on the expense side. Or any questions? Jim?
Seed revenue supposedly will not change within the next 2 years. It's expected to decrease slightly, but the budget was a 2-year budget, and we don't expect any major calamitous things to happen to that.
No, if the the prognosticators at the department and the governor's budget office are close on their numbers, we should not expect any surprises. If they miss as badly as they did in the last 2-year cycle, then there will be some surprises.
Don't hold your breath.
I'll try not to. Well,
So this $30,000 worth of $30,000 of wiggle room.
yes, ma'am.
One thing that I would really like for the board to consider, and I don't know how much it costs. First, I'd like to know how much something costs.
Sure.
We have had so many wonderful, wonderful comments about the stage that we had at the graduation. Is that rented? What would happen if we bought one? Or is it I guess where do you store it and all that kind of stuff, but we had
Great.
I'd just like to see that continue, but I don't know what we do to, I don't know where that is. I mean, will we always have enough to rent it at that time of the year? Or
Well, my sense is you probably have budgeted for it. It's a budget.
Okay.
It came out of maintenance budget probably.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
But, yeah, I think at this point, we could probably look at the actual cost of it and could probably, when we get to the working budget in September, we
Sure.
could find if we can put it in there, the budget for this year, and I can see what the cost would be and if there is a storage opportunity. And I could probably bring it back to you in June.
this is, if the board could, think about that, if that's something that, we would like to see happen, or, and I don't know how the storage of those work, because, that was kind of a massive thing when you look at it. I was out walking when they came and took it down, and it was kind of
Yeah, it
an
was-
operation to take down.
Almost
but-
have to have something that size to
Yeah.
be sturdy enough. And then I guess the other question you would want to ask yourself is that as you're moving into your new property, will you still have the need for a stage of that sort? Those are things I guess you would have to think
And
about.
have a
when you
brand
get
spanking
into-
new auditorium to hold it in, should the capacity be correct, so.
Well, I don't know if the auditorium would hold it, but your gymnasium might. So, those are things you would have to think about. But your auditorium wouldn't hold about 400 or 500 people, we wouldn't. But your gymnasium possibly could, your performance gymnasium could hold 5,000, 4,000 or 5,000, but. So, you might, I can look into it, bring you some information back at the June meeting.
If the board is agreeable, to getting that information, or that would be great. But there have just been so many great community comments from the ceremony this year compared to some other years, so.
That's great.
been very good.
From my standpoint, that's 1/10 of 1%. That's a lot of things that can change over the course of the next year, so.
Yeah.
Exactly right, but at this
Not gonna count my chickens before they're hatched.
At this stage of budget development, you should be pleased with where you are, and hopefully you are. Any final questions? Then I'll sit down.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bob. We appreciate your presentations and getting the information to us, and Stacy and her staff on helping us to understand this every year. So thank you. So any questions before we get our recommendation on approving the school year 2012-2013 tentative budget? Your recommendation is, Dr. Ferris?
I recommend that we approve the 2012-2013 tentative budget.
A motion is in order.
Make motion.
Motion by Ms. Fatkin,
Second.
second by Mr. Slow. Other discussion? Those in favor of approving the 2012-2013 tentative budget as presented and discussed, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. The motion carries 5-0. Thank you very much. Next, consider approval of SBDM carry forward funds in the amount of $26,404.41.
Each year, we bring this to you. We have our schools, if they wish, to submit a plan for carry forward funds. We've received those and reviewed those, and these will be taken out of the ending balance for the year. They're set aside as restricted in our fund balance on our audit, restricted for SBDM use for the next year. And then that will be allocated to the end of the budget for the next year. And so we have
Questions
received-
regarding the carry forward information? Your recommendation, Ms. Farron, Dr. Farron?
Recommend that we approve the SBDM carry forward funds in the amount of $26,404.41 for Stroh Station, Hannah McCord, and Providence.
A motion is in order.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Dr. Kudak,
Second.
second by Mr. Swett. Other discussion? Those in favor of approving the carry forward funds in the amount of $26,404.41 for Stroh Station, Hannah McCord, and Providence, as presented and discussed, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say no. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. And continuing, Consider approval of refinancing the participation resolution for the 2001 KISTA loan.
Yes, we had a KISTA lease from a window replacement project in 2001. Mr. Joe Nance has presented us with this opportunity to refinance the last, I think, 4 years of payments for a savings of approximately $11,501. It does not extend the term over which we will pay this off. It'll be paid off in the same fiscal year that it would have been anyway. And it basically is a savings of interest. You have a copy of the comparison as well attached. So anytime we can take an opportunity to save a little.
Any questions regarding the resolution or the comparison table that was sent? Comment? Okay, your recommendation, Dr. Ferris?
I recommend that we approve refinance and participation resolution for the 2001 KISTA loan.
Motion is in order.
Make a motion.
Motion by Ms. Wolf,
Second.
second by Dr. Kudak. Other discussion? Those in favor of approving the refinancing participation resolution for the 2001 KISTA loan, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, say no. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. And continuing. Well, no, you get to sit down now. You're finished. Okay, Mr. Christie. Tell us about this mule price.
You had the packet of information.
Oh my goodness.
That was
Look through it.
just,
I thought maybe the first thing we'll try to do is give you the long and the short of it. Basically what that's saying is that the Section 205 of the Healthy and Hungry Free Act of 2010 says that you cannot use federal funds to subsidize your regular pay lunches, students who pay. They have a set of guidelines and a calculator that you saw in there, the system to calculate what we should be charging for our lunches. Even though we're charging much less than that and are operating at a profit, in that law it still says that you must make an effort to get to this $2.51. Now that's a figure that's calculated, and it's calculated each year, and that may be a different number next year. So based on those numbers, the minimal amount that we can, if we do the minimum to meet the regulations that we're moving forward to get to that 251 would be 5 cents on the lunch. Now the last time that you raised the lunch price for the high school was back in 2008, 2009. That was the last increase there. And in 2009, 2010, there was an increase at the elementary and middle schools. That one was for 10 cents, and the one at the high schools for 25 cents. And that was back some years back. This one requires a minimum of 5 cents. I give a lot of credit to our food services department here. They a great bunch of people. They do a great job, tremendous job in preparing food. It's good food. And that's why I think you're seeing every year the participation rate go up at every school. It's increasing. And that's adding to the help that we're getting here. If you look on, I think the first page of your document shows what the lunches would move to. It would affect the elementary students who pay full price. It would go to $2. And at the middle school, high school, it would go to $2.30. That calculation is done each year, and it may be 251 this year, and it could go up, which is probably quite possibly what will happen. They rarely ever go down, but it's based on the numbers of participants and those kinds of things.
so is this the first year that it had affected us, or how has it worked
I think
before when we didn't have to do this?
This is the first year.
On this,
and the reason why is because last year was the first year that this came out, and it came out late, so they kind of gave everybody a grace period to see kind of how things were going to work out. And this year, everyone has to, it's mandated that everyone has to show effort at meeting the guidelines.
Wow. Thank you. Other questions about this matter?
All right, so tell me again, I'm sorry. Tell me again, what do our grade school students pay?
Right, currently, they're paying, grade school is $1.25.
And then our middle and high school pay,
$2.25.
so it's just
It's about cents on the margin.
all the way across.
Only ones, yes, only on margin.
So our breakfast stays the same.
And the free and reduced participation rates stay the same.
Other questions or comments?
I heard from my colleague over in Montgomery County, they were not too happy about raising prices either. So, where's Bob? When you write this portion up, Mr. Swope will go along with the federal mandate. Kicking and screaming, but personally would not raise.
I don't think the board would support raising the prices either during these economic times. Ms. Hicks and I kind of discussed this on the phone when we first heard about this, and Becky and Paul will tell you I about died when she said we had to do this. I said, how can someone mandate you to raise your prices? However, I understand it, but especially when, if you all remember, last year we were talking about doing free lunch for everybody.
Yeah. Yep.
Which just doesn't make sense to me. However, we understand that we have to follow the federal law, and as Mr. Swope said, we never are happy about putting another mandate or increase of paying for lunches on our constituents or our stakeholders. However, as we talked about last week, it's just making sure that we don't overdo it for them. But the other thing we talked about when we talked about those criminal records checks, you know, that would have been another mandate that we would have had to increase to our constituency and to our stakeholders in this board. And I'm happy to say that you all decided that we will find that money in the budget. So we do want to say to our public that we do try to find a way not to put too much of a financial burden on you. However, this is a mandate from the federal government that we have to bite it off and chew it. No pun intended. But on the other hand, we'll try to make sure that we're watching to make sure we don't have any other financial burden that we have to put on our public this school year.
Other questions or comments related to the school meal process? So your recommendation, Dr. Ferris?
Hesitantly, I have to approve school meal prices for 2012-2013, and we will ensure that we get this out to our public as soon as possible so they can make the necessary adjustments and preparation.
A motion is in order.
I'll reluctantly make that motion.
Motion by Ms. Fatkin.
Second, along with the
A reluctant motion and a reluctant second and a reluctant recommendation to approve school meal prices for 2012-2013 school year as reflected in the presentation and the mandate. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The motion carries 5-0. Thank you. And continuing with the brick
The board brings in
selection.
front of you the selections, possible selections of brick for the exterior of the elementary project.
Everybody seen them?
Pricing, both of those are in your budget. They're equal in price.
they're almost equal.
Could you expound upon the differences between those, Paul?
This has more of a,
A little darker.
has the burn.
Has some aged. One of them has a little more aged in color look to it, whereas the other one has more of an aged look in the face of the brick itself. There are some
etchings or whatever.
yeah.
Which one is more like concrete currently? Neither one?
I've been assured same quality on each other. There's no difference.
So which one of them looks more like concrete?
All,
Darker.
probably not.
I have no preference.
No preference.
Somebody's got to make a decision.
We'd already
were
decided,
leaky,
yeah, we'd already decided we didn't have a preference.
So you get to
It's just
decide.
like some-
So here's my day, you know, go to work, I go to the dentist for what was supposed to be a filling turned to be a
Roll a
root
tooth?
root canal.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
Which
I'm
one?
in pain and thinking, oh, it's the guy's choice. Okay, doc.
All right, y'all trust me to make this decision, right?
No, I'm going with you. It's the guy's choice.
You all can decide. Does not matter to me.
Does that mean when we get to the interiors?
Then
that
it's
they'll be
us.
excused?
Yes.
You all do the interior.
It's on record.
I guess Rick doesn't leak, does it?
Not supposed to.
I'm always concerned about leaks.
This is kind of interesting. Years ago, when the board was trying to select what color the bricks up at Park Middle, it was all men on the board, and this went on for months trying to make the decision. I suggested, well, why don't you go get your wives to do it? That doesn't look very effective either. We were supposed to do it.
Trust me, it's going to happen in about 2 minutes. Not 2 months.
Number one.
Number one. And what's the name of that one? Is that the Twinnings or Winnings or Vinings? Vinings Modular.
Yeah, that comes with plants growing outside the building.
Okay.
We should flip the coin.
A motion is in order to approve the Vinings Modular number 1 style as the exterior brick color for the new Clark County Elementary School project.
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Dr. Kudak,
Second.
second by Mr.
One of
Swope. How appropriate. Other discussion? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Christie. And now we come to our student learning and instructional services for our 2012 math results, beginning with Strode Station. Ms. Cheetah.
Good evening. How are you? You can see my data up on the board there. We've seen some really nice progress this year, but we are by no means anywhere near close to where I want us to be. I want you to see figures that are in the 80s, high 80s, and 90s or above, but we're getting there slowly. I'll just leave it since we have so many and we're keeping it to a certain time limit. Would you just like to ask questions or?
Third grade math.
Third grade
Yes.
math? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a little disappointing. That was the one, it was surprising because we saw some gains, you know, for the most part, across the board, but I took something and I did something, I don't know if anybody else did, I took every single child in the school for reading and math, I took their beginning of the year score and their end of the year score, and I calculated either growth or drop. And I based it on, and then I looked at it and then I did an average for that entire grade level. Now, expected year's growth and the number of points according to the math assessment is 12 points for third grade from beginning of the year to end of the year. My average across the board for third graders was 11.6 points. So we made the gains, but we didn't start with a lot of children where they needed to be. They didn't come in according to the MAP scores on level. We showed almost an average year's growth across the board. We do know that the fact that fractions was new to third grade this year, we feel like that had something to do with it because there was a lot of fraction work. And as we were going through the mastery check data, we were clearly able to see. We've also taken a look at how we're doing things for next year and some changes. just kind of getting off math for a second, but kind of on it. Our K1 and 2 next year, our emphasis is going to be in our reading, on developing our learning centers for the our work centers for the students, so that in reading the work that they're doing when they're not directly with the teacher is more part of a balanced literacy program, but still exposing all of our children to on-grade level literature. And the math this year, I've allowed, the teachers have done some supplementing in with the investigation. So we know that for 3rd grade, and my own son was in 3rd grade this year, and I know that fractions had a lot to do with it.
The happiest moment in my life is probably when I discovered there was something called decimals. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
The jump from the end of 1st grade to that same group of children at the end of 2nd grade was dramatic at 30 point in the math. That was a nice.
Yeah. And it was good because at first when I looked at the data, I was a little disappointed too, but when I started looking at last year's, like you say, last year's 1st graders in reading who are this year's 2nd graders, and I started tracking my data that way, I went, well, it's still not perfect, but it gave me a little more hope that our kids were maintaining and then still growing from there. Yeah. I was pleasantly very pleased. Actually, it was strange because 1st grade was my biggest concern because of all the transitions we have. We do the flex skills grouping for both reading and math, and surprisingly, when I was telling you about how I averaged that data, in 1st grade, the average growth among my 1st graders in reading was 18.1 points, and 16 points made a year's growth. And in math, 16 points made a year's growth, and the average growth was 19.2 per child. I was shocked. I was really thinking about them keeping their home rooms and keeping heterogeneous groups for next year, but I'm really starting to rethink that now, because I think that has worked well for our 1st graders.
Since you have the data, what's your standard deviation? What's your spread from year to year? Do you see are most kids, increasing their RIT score, 10, let's say you've got an average of 12, is it mostly 11, 12, 13, or do you have big spreads? You have a couple kids in single digits and a couple kids in double digits?
Yeah, I do, and I have it more like that by grade levels. If I look at 4th grade, for instance, in reading, a year's growth is 6 points, and the kids made about 7.1. 5th grade is 5 points in reading for a year's growth, and they made 6.3, which is still good. Surprisingly, in kindergarten, and I was very pleased with the growth that my kindergartners made in both reading and math this year, because we just about doubled, well, not quite doubled, but it went up quite a bit. My average growth in reading for my kindergarten, and this is just, you have to remember, from January until May, or actually April, was 6.7 points, and then in math it was 9.2. So that was, the math was almost a year's growth in just a few months' time.
Not mine.
So even though I know we're still working, I feel like it's important to find those small successes along the way. And the kids knew this year, starting at the winter assessment in math, the students set their own growth, even the kindergartners. They set their goals for themselves. And you would be surprised even at the 5th graders that shed a few tears when they didn't hit that goal. But the teachers had some motivating activities that went on, especially for the last one. Last year's data, the data spiked mid-year and dropped. I said, guys, we want to maintain slow and steady wins the race. And we did that in a lot of areas. It's not where it needs to be yet, but I'm glad we didn't spike and drop. We had one teacher that dressed up in a tuxedo and served pizza because as a class average, he set the average as a 4th grade math teacher. Their RIT goal average was on the 5th grade level, and they met that as a class. They really worked hard. We did goal setting for everything. I met individually with each child for K-Prep, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. They goal set for math. So we're going to carry through a little more of that next year. But what we did realize too is in the area of reading for grades 3, 4, and 5, we realized that our treasures is not as in depth. The material in there is not, the stories are not as in depth as they need to be. After, we got to look at the length of some of the passages that were being used. We're going back now, looking at what KDE has put into the appendices in the English language arts, some of the benchmark stories. That was some of that carry forward money you saw that I'd like to make an investment in some of those pieces of literature for grades 3, 4, and 5 for next year. Any questions? Any other questions?
Other questions related to the map data for Strode?
Okay.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
And next, Ms. Smith.
Good evening. I'm going to agree with Susan regarding the data and how it's definitely not where we'd like to see it. I brought a little bit of a different approach to the data to share with you tonight, which I hope will give you a better picture of kind of how Central's really operating. Looking at, we were looking for two things this year at Central. We were looking for achievement and we were looking for growth. And we used the map data. And what I did is I took a look at, based on the map data, what percentage of students in each grade level actually made grade level or higher, or what percentage showed at least a year's growth or more. So even though this data here, it's not where we need it to be and definitely not where we're headed, when I looked at third grade or second grade, for an example, in reading, 75% of students in second grade made either a year's growth or on grade level or advanced. In third grade, 83% of the students are on grade level or made at least a year's growth. Fourth grade, 82% of the students are either on grade level or made a year's growth in reading. Looking down at math in second grade, 80% of the students are on grade level or made a year's growth. Third grade, 89% of the students are either on grade level or made a year's growth. And for fourth grade, 83%. So even though the data of the children who actually hit the number for map data doesn't look very great, when you're looking at 83, 85, 86, 89%, it's a school that's in growth. And based upon the work that I see in the classrooms, the effort that I see with the staff over there, I'm confident that these numbers will continue to grow. And the schools are growing, and it's progressing.
Your fifth grade numbers for?
Fifth grade has been a very difficult group for us. We've put tons of resources, human resources, all types of materials and things, really tried to break that group down. We've worked with them from the beginning of school year. They've been challenging. They were challenging as fourth graders last year. They were our toughest group. With that group graduating or moving on to middle school, I anticipate that's really the lowest performing group that we're going to have at Central for a while. The fourth grade group this year, actually pretty high performing.
And what do you attribute that to?
Which one?
Both. The status that this group that wasn't.
Right. The fifth grade group, I think that third grade, they had a lot of transitions, which was the year before I got here. They were fairly large class sizes. There were some behaviors that were very challenging, students who were challenging in that way. So I'm not sure exactly what happened before I got here as far as the groups. I know that they, at one point, they were changing classes for every subject area. Third grade, second grade, fourth grade, which means a lot of lost instructional time, a lot of kids moving, different classrooms, which is not always the most effective way to instruct. Fourth grade, we went to self-contained this year. The staff have adopted a bunch of different strategies that I think work, a lot more small group work with math and with reading. One of my fourth grade classrooms, she had 90% of her students who were on grade level or grown at least a year. I have one third grade classroom, 96%, one student who was not on grade level, according to MAP. So the numbers you see here, they're not pretty, but then when you really dig into the data a little bit and you start looking, then you see some really amazing numbers that don't really, those numbers are more of what that school is and how it's beginning to perform. And it's beginning, it's not there yet, but it is, I'm seeing lots of growth.
Are we targeting some of these fifth graders for our summer enrichment?
We have, yes. They've all been invited, and we've made the phone calls to try to get a lot of them in, so I think we've got quite a bit. And we worked a lot this year, too, at Central with our writing and our content areas. We found last year, according to the KCCT, that writing was an area of growth for us. MAP won't measure that. That's a different type of measurement. But we have some amazing writing samples of children who could write, 2 or 3 sentences, and then at the end of the year, they're writing pages. of really pretty proficient writing. So there's just some good growth in that area as well.
Other questions or comments to Ms. Smith? Continue.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Powell?
Kind of like Mrs. Smith now, our data is not what I expected it to be. My journey began on October the 4th, and probably the district has lended a lot of support to Shear School. You know, Brenda's been there quite often, Jennifer Bernhard, Bridget, Debbie Carter, and through all that and the efforts, the last time I had a meeting with the teachers, they're like, Cynthia, we feel like there's some unfinished business that you want to see go forward, and we have made a huge amount of progress this year. And like Mrs. Smith at Central, we've made a lot of our students are close to being on grade level, or their baby years growth, but it doesn't show up in this data. I don't have any reliable data for 2010, so I'm going to blank.
Did that data just not exist?
It existed, but when I redid it, it didn't match my numbers, so.
We had some issues with that data in 2010,
I
correct,
remember.
Pat? I said the map data in 2010, remember at Shear, we had some issues with that data, so. Right, so we didn't.
So I chose not to report that because I wasn't real sure of its validity. Now, the 2010-11 data, that is reliable data that I pulled. We did a lot of focusing on the district goals, which is on the learning targets, and making sure that our tasks stayed on target with the learning targets. I met with the teachers twice a week. We had a lot of courageous conversations, and well, I guess Brenda was there, so she understands how it's like being in a battle with somebody. You know, we were all fighting for our kids. They made tremendous progress as teachers as well. And I would like to thank the elementary principals, because I can't tell you how many meetings we had, and they would say, Cynthia, what can we do to help Shear? We're not going to be successful unless Shear's successful. And that culture change just within our district has been very supportive. But we did, as you can tell, our kindergartners on reading and math are great high percentage above grade level. Well, we'll let you know that those teachers are not pleased with those numbers. They want them to be even higher. Our first graders made progress in reading and in math as well. We made probably an anomaly here, but we made a bigger growth in our math scores in first grade than we did in reading.
Yes, that was interesting. Very interesting.
We made progress from fall to spring in our second grade in reading as well as in math. 20-point jump in math. We had one teacher that had 75% of her children on grade level or above in the math on the math. Third grade, we had a lot of issues in third grade, and we had extra resources dedicated to that. We hired a teacher in January to work specifically with third grade. We had a math specialist who, after looking at the data, said, I'm going to rearrange my schedule and work with third grade. So we had a lot of additional support for those children, and a lot of those children made humongous gains in the math. They may not be on grade level, but they're working their way that direction. Fourth grade made progress in reading and in math, and fifth grade we kind of stayed about the same in reading and math. This year, based on the data, our site base is elected to hire a reading specialist for third, fourth, and fifth grade to continue those conversations. We have data wall in our kindergarten, our K through 2 wing, and also third, fourth, and fifth, that helps focus those conversations.
Explain that.
We track in the primary. We track their sight words, their guided reading level, and their math scores. So that we've set benchmarks for those, and each month they know that this is where we're supposed to be. on all of those. And we have those conversations, we redo our RTI groups and our flex skills groups that way. We started that same thing in January with the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students. And, you know, it was interesting to take those pictures of those data walls as we moved the Post-it notes for each child's score on it. For the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, we did comprehension, fluency, and their math scores. So it helped make us more intentionally focused on each individual child, because we actually sat down with the teachers and discussed each child in that grade level. Sometimes it would take 2 meetings during that week to get those discussions taken care of. And then we formulated an instruction to go with that. We've spent a lot of our money trying to buy classroom sets of books to make sure that we've got them on the proper reading level for everybody. And that's the kind of things that the site-based wants to go ahead and continue next year, which is why they elected to have a reading specialist for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade as well.
You know, with some of the data that we look at, and I'm just looking at this one in 5th grade, you know, I think that this goal that the board has set for 100% of students to be on grade level when exiting the 3rd, 5th, and 8th grades, you know, I think that was ambitious when we established it. It's still ambitious. But, you know, I just have some real concerns, you know, what happens in middle school when that is such a transition. And looking at this 5th grade math with 34% on grade level. And
I've had those conversations with my friend Ms. Whiteside.
That's what I was going to ask. How do our middle school principals, you know, when, you know, you're looking at this and you know what you're having to deal with when they're getting to you this next year. So
we started those, Pam and I started those conversations. We worked really hard, and the focus that those children had on the K-Prep test, no one in the 5th grade missed a day of school during the 5th grade K-Prep. And so if hard work and being there gets it, then I'll be really excited to see the scores.
Yeah.
Because it's not for lack of effort for those children.
Right. And yeah, when I see the way the teachers are working and the way the students are learning and the strategies and things that are going on and the resources that the board has provided, and then when we see some of these results, it's like, oh, what do we need to do differently to be sure that we as a board, what do we need to do to let you all know that, you know, we're really intentional about this ambitious goal. We really want to see it, and I think people are working toward that. I guess you just want results faster.
Oh, I want it really fast.
Yes.
Well, and that's why we look at different pieces of data too, because we're looking at the guided reading level for all grade levels. If they can't read, even on the math test, they're not going to do very well. So our focus is on that guided reading level and making sure that instruction is at that level for them.
One of the things too we have to keep in mind, and we have this conversation on a regular basis, is when we use this map data, and many school districts across the state is using this, is that it is really a diagnostic assessment, and we have chosen to use it to bring you information 3 times a year. So as you look at it, we have to keep in mind as well, as I think Lisa was talking about, is that we still have many kids who may be 1 grade level below or 2, and they're within 2 or 3 points in that range that would say they are on grade level. So we don't throw all of our eggs in this basket, but it is an opportunity for us to have some real discussions with you all around who is and isn't on grade level. At this point in time, this is really the only type of data that we are able to present to you to show you some progress, what on grade level and not on grade level may look like in these particular grade, in these grades, 3rd, 5th, and 8th. So I'm not going to say that we shouldn't look at it that way, but I do think we have to continue to have that conversation, because what it has done for this district is that it has allowed principals and staff to really start looking at the progress of students in reading and math. And so I do think it's an ambitious goal, but I think it's something that we have to keep on the table so that we will keep striving for that particular goal, because I do think it's important. And as you will continue to hear the next few months, the next few years, is that many districts are talking about exiting third graders on grade level, because if they're not, then that's when they find that it's more difficult for them to do those other kinds of things when they get to 5th grade, 8th grade, and high school. So I think we're at a point now where we are using this data to look at what else we need to do instructionally, what else we need to do via our curriculum, and we are having those real conversations. And I have been pleased really with the progress. And so I think it's a time issue. We continue to keep it on the table. We continue to look at it, and to, as you can see, even just with the kindergarten progress at Shear Elementary School, if you look back when we looked at it in fall 2010, look at that. Yeah. So that tells you that we are doing some right things, let me put it that way. Because if you look at from 30% to 84%, that is nothing to sneeze at. And it's really about what's going on in the classroom, the instruction, because nothing else is really changing. I mean, the kids are, but it's talking about what we are doing a better job in that classroom every day, and providing some interventions and providing some resources for our most struggling kids. And so I think you're going in the right direction. I think you keep the goal where it is, and we continue to look at that and continue to do those things that we need to do to ensure that we're getting those kids where they need to go. And a lot of it is just expectations, and I think those conversations are changing. And I specifically talk about at Shear Elementary School, those conversations are changing. We're seeing better instruction in those classrooms at Shear Elementary School. So I think just having this on the table, that is giving teachers an opportunity to really look at some data, and they're able to make those adjustments along the way. It's not a summative assessment, but along the way they can make some instructional adjustments. They can have those real conversations. And as Cynthia and Pam and Patrice and our elementary, we're having that vertical conversation and trying to align all of that so that we can graduate our kids college and career ready. So it's just one of those. That's really the only piece of data we have to bring to you to see if we are progressing toward that exiting third grade on grade level. And you're hearing a lot of conversation about that across the state, because we know how important it is. That's why this year we went back a grade on the Learning Academy, that we wanted to look at our rising first graders, because second grade is almost too late. If we can catch them from kindergarten to first grade, which is what we're doing this summer, then we have a better opportunity to put those instructional foundations in place so these students can be academically successful when they come back to us as first graders next year.
One thing we did also, I told you one teacher had 75% of her students on grade level for math. We broke it down, each math test by grade, by teacher. So then we knew where the instruction was going on in the room, and then we could offer support for those that didn't have as many. When I got to Shear, students were not allowed to take books home. There was a fear that books would be gone and they wouldn't come back. This year, I cannot tell you how many teachers they either bought like recyclable grocery sacks to send books home, or they filled a Ziploc bag full of books home. Teachers were cutting out books and putting the little binding combs on to send home with the kids. And the kids are like, can I take some books home? Can I take some books home? So, it's been a huge growth for the kids. They all know where their learning targets are. They want to get there. I walked through the cafeteria one day, they were all showing me their report cards. They wanted to show me their report cards. So, and we had 50-some stay for ESS, and they were there almost every day. I mean, it was a tremendous. The kids really do want to learn. During 5th grade, I was telling them today at supper, I said, we had one little girl, she was really smiling. I said, you okay? She goes, I feel so special because of our promotion. So that whole culture thing is the kids, they really do want to learn.
Thank you for changing that. Thank you for changing.
Well, I appreciate the district support for doing that, but it's been a tremendous thing. And I do have some unfinished business. I'll politely hand it over to Mrs. Dawson and let her run with it. Where I was creeping along, she could run with it.
I see a lot of positive trends in the data. I'd like to personally thank you. This is a great expense to your golf handicap.
Yes.
No, it has been a wonderful experience. You know, I taught there before, and I think that helped bridge some of the gaps there, and it was instant. We went in there, and by the time we had spent all day data there, we were all entrenched in it.
Other questions or comments to this panel? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for helping out there. And Ms. Thompson.
You know, Friday, when I left school, I thought that I had completed the year and I'd done all my firsts. I was ready to start over, and this is January 1st. Maybe come July 1st, everything will be a repeat. I think we have lots to celebrate, and I just want to jump in and say we are absolutely on the right track, and we should keep those bars where they are, because I think what we're seeing is just tremendous. I found this chart. I don't know who created this, but I loved it. When it came, I was like, why are all those colors there? Once we dropped the data in, I was like, oh yeah, that's what we've been asking for, because teachers always complain that we compare this year's 6th grade to last year's 6th grade. They're different kids. So this was really interesting to me. And then you can also compare where our 6th grade ended last year and where they ended this year, and what was the growth from fall to spring. That winter score, got a little baffled, but it's not unusual. You'll see on the left-hand side of the form where the grade level scores are, and you'll see how in the elementary school they jump by 9, 10 points for several grades. But as they approach middle school, they slow down considerably. So from 5th to 6th grade, well, from 4th to 5th grade, 6-point jump. But from 5th to 6th grade, it's just a 4-point jump. And from 6th to 7th, it's a 4-point jump. Then the 8th grade is just a 2-point jump. So when you get that kind of change, you know, within 2 points for a year's growth, then the data gets it gets a little hard to depend on. It shifts a little bit on you, and I think the longer span you've got to compare it to, the more accurate it is. So I really believe that fall to spring is a much more accurate snapshot of what's actually gone on this year than fall to winter or winter to spring. And certainly from the beginning of 2 years back to leaving now, those are things to really celebrate. I mean, if you look at our current 7th grade, and they came into us last year at 40%, and they left 7th grade this spring, in May at 57%. Those are tremendous growth in a place where the growth isn't that big. So do I think we're doing miraculous things? I think there's just several things that are happening. I think that we certainly have a focus on achievement. I think we're paying a lot of attention to data. I think kids, we're stressing student accountability. We certainly have that conversation at our school. We have that talk before they sit down to take that test about this really is about them, and it's between them and the test. And they have everything to gain and nothing to lose by doing their very best on this test. That people look at data without the ability to have a conversation with them. They can come and sit down with me and say, oh, I just didn't feel like it. But I said to them, you know, when the high school folks are looking at your 8th grade data, they don't have you sitting there telling them that you just didn't feel like it. They're assuming that that's the best you can do. So we talk a lot about, please show us the best you can do. And so I think all that emphasis, the kids have been doing goal setting all year. And they even, before they go to take their MAP test, they put their goal on a sticky note, and they go in to take it, and they put that sticky note up on the monitor, and they take that test, and they've got that goal right in front of them. So we do the little strategies like that. I think teacher awareness. You know, I share the data constantly with my teachers. Every time I report something to you all, I report it to my staff. I feel like if they're being talked about at a board meeting, they need to know what's being said, so I share all that with them. So I think they're getting it, you know, that we're looking at that data and making judgments about it. While we're not, you know, the spring scores aren't where we want to be, I think if you look at the 2-year growth, it's tremendous. At Concrete from fall to spring, we averaged a 4-point jump. That's exactly what we were supposed to have done. Both in the 6th grade and in the 7th grade, we got that 4-point jump. And in the 8th grade, in reading, we went back 1 point. But again, I'll say when you get that close with 2 points, deciding whether or not you've moved a year and you filter in standard deviation, it's nothing to be ashamed of. When we figured in, we took our scores and figured standard deviation, our percentages went up into 70 to 75%. That was more realistic and felt more right to my teachers, that 75, 78% of our kids were on grade level, not 64 or 57. In conversations with my teachers about MAP data, they feel like that it's really accurate and good for predicting the really high achiever and the really low student. But when you get around grade level, it gets real fuzzy. And so that's why we said, okay, we need to pull in that standard deviation, which is about 12 to 14 points. And so when you do that, then the percentages shoot up to more what feels like is going on in our building. 75% of our kids are on grade level. So I just think, same thing with math. You'll see from 5th to 6th grade, we should have gone up 5 points, and from 6th to 7th, 6, and 7th to 8. No, I'm sorry, 6th to 7th, 5, and then 7th to 8th, 3. And at Concrete, we were right on the money with the 6th grade, and we were 6 in the 7th grade. We were 6 points up, and in the 8th grade, we were 6 points up instead of 3. So we just have lots to celebrate. And I think you're going to continue to see, I think in 3 years, you're just going to sit back and say, whoa, look what we've done. We just finished 3 days of springboard training, College Board springboard training, and I'm so excited. And I said to my teachers at the end of the day, I put them together, and because I'd already started hearing, oh my gosh, our kids can't do that. You realize our kids aren't prepared for this. And I said to them, please don't sell them short. We're going to, yes, we've raised the bar, and we need to help them understand where that bar is, but we need to constantly say to them they can do this, and we'll work with them. And in 3 short years, that bar is going to be the standard. And all of a sudden, our 8th grade is going to start showing us things that we never dreamed they could do. But you got to put it out there even when they're not ready for it. And Miss Bernard was there today, and so her mind's clicking about, oh my gosh, this is what 6th graders have to do in College Board springboard. This is what I need to talk to Ms. Considine about in the 5th grade and all the elementary principals, because those 5th graders need to understand what the expectation is when they get to middle school for this kind of curriculum. So I think we're on the right track. We're making great progress. Can I answer any questions? I talked more than I listened, didn't I?
You answered all of our questions without us having to ask.
Well, the conversation that preceded me was rich, and this is just all on target. So.
Questions or comments to Ms. Thompson? Thanks very much for what you do at Concrete. Thanks. And Ms. Whitesides.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First of all, let me apologize to everyone in this auditorium that for my phone going off. I thought I had turned it off when we talked about it earlier, but that's what I get for not putting my glasses on to check to see when I turned it off or on. But having 2 octogenarian parents and one who had gone to the doctor today, and that was what the call was about. So anyway, I just wanted to apologize to everybody. That doesn't usually happen. I too, like Patrice, am celebrating this MAP data. Are we where we want to be? Absolutely not. And my teachers also were in the springboard training, and they are just as excited and chomping at the bit to get going in the fall, in August. But if you look at our data, and going back to Mrs. Hicks' comment to Ms. Powell, my dear friend Ms. Powell, who promises me that she is on the track to get our kids on grade level before they come to me. She's told us several times this year that she has had those conversations with the students and the teachers, and I know the other principals have done so as well. But if you see where we've come from, in fall of 2010 with our little sixth graders who came in, and we only had 30%, and that was 64 children. I remember that number. It just slapped me in the face when I saw that. 64 out of the 225 who came in that year were on 30% were on grade level, and then now they are 55%. And I want to give you some numbers before we go through the rest of it, because I too, like Lisa Smith, always go down and look at the RIT cutoff score for 1 point below where our students should be. And if I give you those numbers, you're going to be amazed. For the sixth grade, the percentage would be 61 4/10, if you want to write those down. And for the seventh grade, it would be 60%. That's just those students who are 1 point below the RIT score, the cutoff score. And then for the eighth grade, it would be 65. In the reading, in the math, down at the sixth grade level, it would be 60%. Seventh grade would be 51.2%, and eighth grade would be 64. And you can see those numbers when I share that with the teachers and we talk about, they are just amazed. And I really share those with the students as well, because they need to see that it's just a little more, maybe 1 or 2 questions more that they need to focus on and really pay more attention to, and go back in the text if they're reading, or take a little time and do more pencil work on their calculations. But going back to the numbers, sixth grade, they came in at 30%, and then you can see we had good growth that year. They went up to 44%. They continued that growth in the fall, which was amazing to me. They didn't do any fall off like most of the other grade levels did. And they went through being seventh graders, they came up to 55 and then 60 if you use those numbers that I just gave you. Good growth there, good growth in this year's sixth grade, I think from 45 to 52. And Patrice has already shared with you those cutoffs where you have 4 points, the growth, I guess the growth needed for that particular grade level from 216 to 220. And then in seventh grade, I had to ask the teachers in seventh grade, what happened here? We came along 42%, we went to 70, and then as they went to the eighth grade, we dropped down to 49%. And one of the teachers said, well, if you remember, and I think probably other people in the district remember this as well, there were times when if a student came in and sat there and was not interested in doing his test, they would come to me and they'd say, Ms. Whitesides, what do we do? Well, you make him take it over. And so I think that's where that big 70% came from. And so we were told at the beginning of this year, do not have any student retaking those tests. It has to be the first time, only time. And so I think that made the difference there. But still good growth throughout the year. Eighth grade, as they came into eighth grade, they went from 49% to 57%. I think that's a good, we made those growth marks there in reading. And then when you go down to math, same thing. The sixth graders did real well from winter to the spring. Good growth from 39% to 54%. Seventh grade, we're a little concerned there. They went from 41 down to 39 and then back up to 44. They weren't in the 60s. They were the only group that was not in the 60s if you think about those students who are just 1 point below. And then eighth grade, just amazing there in the eighth grade math. And I think we were rather pleased with our end of course assessments for algebra also when those scores came out. We had really good results there. So we were very pleased with that. Any questions that you have burning in your minds after you've looked at the data for a couple of days? We have had an intense focus on academics and building relationships. That's another thing. We had our Real Men's Club who went fishing last week, took our at-risk students, and that was fun for both the guys and the the little fellas and the male teachers. They had a lot of fun. One student caught a 33-pound catfish.
Wow.
33-pounder. So he says, I've never been fishing and I've never caught a fish. We had his picture and all that. So it's really cool. But questions? We're on the right track. I think we really are. In the fall, we've changed our schedule. As you know, we had 2 math classes for every student in our building. That was 102 math minutes per day. This year, we're going to have more. We've kind of reduced by 10 minutes the amount of math time, and we're going to increase our language arts time. That's been a real problem for us, and so we've put both 90-minute blocks in all of the math and reading, language arts.
Questions or comments to Ms. Whitesides? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think when you look at the data from our 9th grade, and that's the only grade out there that does math testing, you can see when they left last year, I'm not quite sure how to explain to you how the bump happened between the end of school last year to the fall this year. But when we look at where they ended the 8th grade year to where they ended this year, for all categories, I think except for in disability and math, there was positive movement. Probably not quite what we saw last year, but a lot of what we kind of transitioned this year into more just direct interventions for reading, into a little bit more of college readiness. It's kind of becoming more of our focus, but there was pretty good positive growth movement anyway.
And that's very commendable when you have all of those categories and to have, made the positive progress in all except the disabilities. That's quite commendable. Questions, or do you have any words of wisdom there, Mr. Baldwin, for how all that occurred?
Not really. I've got, hopefully later on I'll be able to share some more data with you that's a lot more, that I'm a lot more excited about.
What's your summer look like for the high school? What your, like summer school, what you're working on?
We're doing the high school's be in 2 weeks. We're going to start June 4th, go for 2 weeks, and it's all content recovery. We're stressing those kids that need to go back and do some work in the 4 EOC areas. That's what we're targeting for those, as well as some kids who will be upcoming seniors next year. You probably need, if they need to make up a credit or something, they can come back for that. Then also we've got 4 weeks of incoming 9th graders for reading and math.
Questions or comments to Mr. Baldwin?
You didn't mention that about the reading specialist?
Oh, no, we have actually, within our allocation, we're adding, we've also got posted a reading specialist position to try to, what we're wanting to do there is also expand on our interventions, because at the high school level, it's a lot harder for us to do interventions with kids because we're going on every different direction. But also with that person, we're hoping to be able to use them maybe a period a day to where we can embed them with the teachers and have them share teaching strategies, reading strategies with other teachers, maybe even model lessons, particularly like in social studies and science. So that's kind of what we're thinking. And I know that we're also, I can't even think of the grant we're in, but the CCLD.
Striving Readers.
Well, we're Striving Readers ends this year, but what's the thing we're doing this summer? CCLD?
Oh, yeah.
Literacy Design Collaborative, yeah.
So we're involved in that. We're sending 3 teachers to go through that. The social studies, science, and English teacher partners up for that for some strategies. And I think it's one of the areas too that when you look at the way our ELC scores came back, if we had had some reading strategies probably embedded a lot in social studies and U.S. history, our U.S. history scores will probably improve. But I think that's a weakness we have, and it's something we got to work on.
We had discussed also a couple of the principals, well, actually Susan and I had talked about it, and Lisa said she wanted some of it too. But we had talked about, Judy, you mentioned this earlier when we was looking at the MAP data, is there anything that we can do because those goals are so ambitious? And we just talked a little bit about the possibility of what if the first 6 weeks of school that our first graders came in, that all we did for 6 weeks was literacy, so that we could embed them in an academic culture and help them to become academically successful. Because we know if they can't read, or they don't have those literacy skills, then it's hard for them to do anything else well. And so I threw that out there with Susan, and she really liked the idea, because what we said was, if we can get them reading well those first 6 weeks, you're going to make up the time in those other content areas. So Susan said she was going to look at it. She really liked the idea. Lisa said she thought she was going to look at it as well.
That sounds so much like what they are.
Yeah. So what I said to them, you all go back, look at it, play with it, and then let us know how we can support that. Because I firmly believe that if we can get them those first 6 weeks, when they get back, that we can build that foundation of success. I think I told them, I said, you guys, that'll be an action research project, because I really think it's going to make a difference.
Let me ask you a parallel question, Dr. Ferris. What resources does the district have in place to assist teachers to teach students who have dyslexia? In a given population, there's a lot of argument about how frequent it is, but it's probably somewhere between 5 to 10% of the general population has a reading disability. Okay, so in an average classroom, you're looking at anywhere from 1 to 3 kids in every single classroom in the district.
So I guess I could ask Donald and the principals if you have found that you have that many kids that have dyslexia. But I know that our special ed department, we have an awesome...
It's not a special ed thing, Dr. Ferris. Dyslexia is much like ADD, or it's across the spectrum, and you have all different degrees of severity. Okay, and I think the kids that are very obviously dyslexic will fall out, and we end up doing special things for them. But there are a lot of kids out there with mild issues. Okay, and it's critical that we get to those kids and make sure those kids succeed within the first 3 grades, and make sure school stays a positive place, and make sure that their needs are being met.
And we can't identify them unless we go through our special ed department. And when we do identify them, then we're able to give them the interventions and the support they need. But if we don't know that, then of course they do fall through the cracks. So when we have an intervention, when we find out that there is a need for a student that is struggling academically, then we proceed to do the evaluation. That's the only way we could do it. We couldn't just say, because they're struggling, that they have dyslexia. We have to have an instrument in place. We have an assessment in place that we use to determine if that is actually the issue, just like we do for ADHD, just like we do for learning like a speech disorder, or like we do for a developmental delay. That's how we do dyslexia as well. So we have to have something in place to identify them.
Well, I want to make sure our teachers are equipped to handle the kids and are given resources to assist them in teaching kids with mild delays.
And so I guess I can ask Donald how we do that with our teachers.
Yeah, these are kids that are not going to be way off. They're going to be slightly off. But if it's not addressed in those primary grades, it's going to be a continuing problem throughout their school career.
We have created a structure in the system called RTI, which that addresses all delays in any child here, regardless of the nature of the delay, whether it be dyslexia or ADHD or any other thing. We have a system by which principals and teachers identify children with those delays, put them into tier interventions regarding research-based stuff, and teachers have done a really good job in addressing those challenges with kids across the RTI process. Of course, if children do not respond and they have more serious delays as they proceed through the tiers, then we go into the referral processes, as Dr. Ferris has indicated, so that we can provide more intensive, federally funded interventions for those children. But as she had also indicated, we, as a public school system, or our State Department, does not acknowledge dyslexia as a disabling condition. And dyslexia or reading disabilities is generally the characteristic that the state identifies or the federal government identifies. So if children have severe dyslexia, then they will get federally funded support services if they qualify for a child as a child with specific reading disability.
Other questions or comments?
I had a question about your, the first 6 weeks literacy. Were you looking at just one test school or district-wide?
Whichever principals want to do it.
Two schools? I'm sorry. Two ladies in the back, one each other. Okay,
We want to open that up to, you know, as we continue to say in this district, we don't want you to be in the box. We want you to get out of the box and think, be creative, be innovative. What other ways that we can support our students to be academically successful? We've tried these things. We haven't done the things we wanted to do trying these things. So think differently. What else can you do? And I tell them all the time, if you can think of something that you're willing to try and we can support it, that's what we want to do. So I've thrown it out there. So far, there's 2 principals who said we would really like to try. Of course, they'll get the buy-in from their teachers. And when they come back and say, here's what we want to do, then we'll have to we have to decide how we can support them in that. So if there's other principals who want to do it, elementary principals, then of course, yeah, we'll support them as well. But these 2 said they were really looking at trying that. So I think it's going to make a difference. I really do. I think it will also, Dr. Kudak, I think at that point in time, you will be able to have those flex groups. You will be able to have that those small groups where you can really watch the reading along the way rather than having reading here and then something else over here. You can really watch those kids, those first formative years, and you're able to put in quicker interventions. And if there needs to be more severe things, then we'll have more opportunity to get them from in those tier levels where they need to be, and we can provide those intense interventions. So I think I'm anxious to see the principals who do it and watch that data to see if it's really going to make a difference having those real close 6 weeks of intense literacy for 6 consecutive weeks. But one of the things we know that research tells us, even when we have those summer programs, is 4 weeks is not enough time to make an impact on accelerated learning. That it says 6 weeks or more. But we're just not able to do the 6 weeks because what happens with us in our community is our attendance starts to fall off after those 4 weeks. So we have to do what we can with what we can. But I'm anxious to see if those 6 weeks with that captive audience, because we've got them from 8 to 2:30 or 7:30 to 2:30, to see if it really will make a difference with their reading skills. So we'll keep you updated on that if they go forward with it. Sorry, David. It really does impact you.
Any other questions or comments to Mr. Boland, who has stood patiently there while we have deviated some? But, yes. Okay. Thank you. Thanks to all the principals for the discussion here. Some of my favorite times when we're talking about these kinds of things. I think I speak for all the board members regarding
We'll
that.
have, Pat will bring the district data by grade level next time in June, and we'll have the day treatment to bring his data at that time as well. We'll have Greg, and then Pat will bring the grade level, elementary, middle, and high, and see how they did across the same longitudinal data.
Very good.
In June.
The next item is to consider approval of changing the job description for Assistant Superintendent to Chief Academic Officer.
Before I get into that, I would like to say we did not say anything about Mrs. Rosenthal retiring tonight, but I wanted to state that I would like for the board to share with us before the meeting on June the 19th, and we'll have a reception for Pat. We'll start at 4:30 and it'll be in the auditorium so that we can give our teachers and our administrators and our community an opportunity to say thank you for the service that she has given us for 25 years. So we'll have that ready to go and planned. And we'll do that on at 4:30 on June the 19th in the auditorium. since she wasn't able to share with us at our other retirement reception. I know she's totally surprised. Didn't want to tell her, wanted to surprise her. But, and so we'll give her her accolades at that time. We did also have a little opportunity to say thank you to her on yesterday as well from the cabinet. But this, what I've asked the board to do is to give me an opportunity to change the title that Pat used when she was here for her 17 years of central office. And what I'm looking at, because the focus has changed across the state, and it's more high-stakes accountability, the implementation of Senate Bill 1, and as we are moving toward the full implementation of Senate Bill 1, there will be 2 more pieces added that districts and schools will have to look at, which includes next generation professionals with the new effectiveness system coming out, and also next generation schools and districts. And with that being said, we're looking at realigning some of those responsibilities so that they will have more of an impact on this work that's going to be coming forward in the next few years. You would see that in your packet is the job description. Pat and I did talk about this. We looked at what was going on across the state. We looked at Senate Bill 1, looked at the responsibilities that the current title has right now, and we kind of talked about some things that we could realign. And the reason I wanted to bring this tonight is because we're right into the peak of the public schools vacancies and hiring process. And so it will give us an opportunity to get the job description, to get the job out there and get it posted, to see what kind of candidates that we will get or applicants we will get for this position. And after this position is filled, then I will probably come back and have to realign some of the other job description here at central office. There will not be any additional staff added. There will be no additional costs to anything that's already going on, but may have to have some realignment and some restructuring so that we can continue to move forward and to support all the new stuff that's going on across the state with the limited resources that we have. So tonight I'm asking if you would give me permission to change the Assistant Superintendent for Student Achievement, Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, long title, to Chief Academic Officer, and you can see those responsibilities in the job description.
How about cost for this position specifically?
I'm not sure right now exactly what Pat's salary is, but I think it's based on the teacher's salary and the additional number of years that the individual has. It also has a, what's the index?
I believe it's 27.5.
And a 27.5% index, as well as a 240 days. So that's how it would be structured for whoever came in. So I would doubt that an individual would come in with as many years of experience as Pat, because if they did, they'd be near retirement probably. And not usually would you have someone who would come in at this level at that number of years of experience. It will probably be someone that has, well, the requirement says have had at least 3 years of experience in a central office. So I would say it would be anywhere probably between 8 to 15 years experience. So it will probably be less of a salary than we're paying right now. But that's really what this salary is based on. The teacher's salary, number of years of experience, the rank that they have, whether it's a rank 1 or master's or doctorate, and then the 27.5% index.
Okay, because that would be my concern. I mean, you know, this is going to be, you're going to be recruiting for a fairly high-powered individual who has a lot of experience. It's going to be significant recruiting costs in the district, so.
Probably not as much as we pay Pat. But probably comparable, but not more than that. I would not think that anyone would come in with that many years of experience. They would have had some of the same types of experience, but not the same number of years of experience. So
I'm thinking 5-10 years down the road what that salary is going to be, and that's going to be a recurrent expense for us, so that's
right.
a concern for me.
And
53 extended days, 27.5% index. questions about the changes being recommended for the job description? Or other comments related to it?
Do other districts have a, I know they have a.
Chief academic
Chief,
officer?
yes.
That's what most teachers are going to. Yeah. That's pretty much probably 6 years ago. That was something that had been talked about several times in most of our state conferences, and that most districts are going to a chief academic officer, simply because of the same reasons I said, just the work is changing. And rather than calling an assistant superintendent, that they want them to have more of a focus around what is going on across the state and the nation with the whole academic instructional focus. So many districts are going to chief academic officer. Madison County, Jessamine, most of those districts. I don't know about Montgomery, I don't know about them, but I do know.
I know Montgomery went through a realignment and job description earlier this year. So I wasn't sure, 100% sure.
And just to be clear, this is replacing what we have as PATH.
Right. It's not a new position. It's just renaming that position.
So we don't have to abolish the assistant superintendent position to have this one, we're just changing that title.
Right.
Other questions or other clarification needed?
And more than likely, we'll be paying less.
I can't make you that guarantee, but I would assume that you would. I wouldn't think that somebody who has 27 years of experience would want to start a new job.
I don't know, I started a new job after
Dr. Kudak talked about 5 or 10 years ago, it sounded like I may talk around and retire.
So other questions related to this item?
I want to make sure I've heard that clear, where the assistant superintendent is not, the job description is not going away, but we're redefining it as a chief academic officer.
We're changing that description to chief academic officer job description.
That's what I'm asking. Consider
Okay.
approval of changing the assistant job description to chief academic officer job description.
Okay, so Pat will retire as the last assistant superintendent.
Right.
There you go.
It will be
There you go.
effective
There's-
July
No,
1st.
special. And effective July 1.
Right.
Okay. Other clarifications needed? Other questions or comments? Okay, your recommendation, Dr. Ferris.
I recommend that you approve the changing of the Assistant Superintendent for Student Achievement Curriculum Instruction Assessment job description to Chief Academic Officer job description.
A motion is in order.
Make the motion.
Motion by Mr. Swope. Second by Ms. Wolf. Other discussion? All in favor of approving the changing the Assistant Superintendent for Student Achievement Curriculum Instruction and Assessment job description to Chief Academic Officer job description, say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
Motion carries 4-1 with Ms. Fatkin, Ms. Hicks, Mr. Swope, and Ms. Wolf voting aye, and Dr. Kudak voting no. The next item, internal board business. Just a reminder, I put at each of your places the instrument for the superintendent evaluation. And the date I have written there is if you could have those back to me by Friday, June 15th. And just put them in my mailbox back there will be fine. And the evaluation will be at our meeting on June 19th. And will that be after, how are we doing this with the reception? When do we start at the reception? Afterwards, after the meeting.
Just so we're clear, the procedure is I want to make sure, did Bob already leave? Dang, he left again. I remember last year, everyone left after we had a closed session. Do this.
Okay, last year we started before the meeting, but we did not finish.
Okay.
And part of it can be in closed session.
Okay.
The preliminary part discussion.
Preliminary discussions in closed session.
Yes, and then open session, and we'll look at the law again to see how all that's worded on exactly what we can do in the closed session and when we come back into open session. Other questions about that? We have no consent agenda items. So the only thing left is to adjourn. A motion is in order to adjourn.
Make the motion.
Motion by Ms. Patkin.
Second.
Second by Mr. Swope. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries 5-0, and we are adjourned at 8:26 p.m. Thank you.